Okay, yo, we are back on the early morning philosophy, sneaking around watching videos routine. Everyone's still sleeping, so be a little bit quiet, but been right in the middle of checking out this discussion with Galen Strawson. I figured we'd check out some more of that. Also, we're in the middle of what's going to be a very long engagement with House Chain's lectures. Haven't even really started that. And then also on deck is this interesting looking talk that was actually suggested that I check out from a request by John Vervaeke, Levels of Intelligibility, Neoplatonism, and 4E Cognitive Science. So I should be getting to that sometime relatively soon. If you have something to recommend for me to check out, then go ahead and let me know, because there's still, at least until through the end of February, this is what I'll be doing. Like it or not. Okay, so we have it right here, right where we left it. Let's check this out. I don't know if I want to get all of this other stuff, the meaning of life and free will. I'm curious about his views on consciousness. So we've already been checking them out. He's been talking about how he's anti-illusionist. He's given his argument for panpsychism that involves no strong emergence. He's given his claim that dualism is improbable, and that he thinks of his view as really the true version of physicalism or materialism, starting from the common sense idea that physics studies the things around us, like pens and so forth, and then if their ultimate nature turns out to be consciousness, then the material world, what is material on his way of thinking, is consciousness. So it's an interesting view. I have some tiny bit of sympathy to it on some days, but other days I find myself thinking, so we'll see which day today is.
Yeah, and I mean, so an objection that people are sometimes going to give you there is they'll say, well, this is all, Galen, this all just depends on an intuition.
Problem, if you say that, a problem which is solved, at least at a very general level, if you think that consciousness is already somehow part of the fundamental nature of physical stuff.
Okay, good. Yeah, and I mean, so an objection that people are sometimes going to give you there.
So that's where we came from last time, was that we don't think the problem is solved because they don't get around the hard problem as traditionally presented. And I don't really see how positing consciousness at the fundamental level helps in any way at all, except with this emergent stuff. So you can say, well, look, the thing that emerges is like the thing that was there before. But as I said in that previous reaction, I think that's question begging, because there's no evidence that consciousness isn't like that stuff. It doesn't seem that way, but I don't think we can take that at face value. So, okay, well, let's see. So you just said the objection is this is based on intuitions, the intuition that there's no emergence. Is that going to be the claim? Okay, good.
They'll say, well, this is all, Galen, this all just depends on an intuition, right? Like you have this intuition that you can't get consciousness from non-consciousness, but we can't really trust their intuitions. What do you say to that?
Well, I mean, say, where do they get the idea that matter is non-conscious?
Mm-hmm. Also an intuition, right? So
what evidence is there for it? There is zero evidence for it.
So can you get?
He said, where did they get the idea that matter is unconscious, and there's zero evidence for it? Oh, it's hard to take stuff like this seriously. Okay, zero evidence, you say. Interesting. I mean, there's some evidence for it, given that we have first-person experience, access to our own experience, don't have access to the rocks. So I don't have that first-person evidence. And I don't have that about you either, but you behave in a way that suggests to me, similar enough to me, it seems ridiculous to assume that you don't have consciousness, although it's a logical possibility. When it comes to the rocks and the tables of the world, they don't present any, the electrons of the world, they don't behave in the way that typical conscious agents, the ones that paradigmatically count as conscious agents, like humans and animals, possibly even plants, depending on your view. So there's zero evidence that they aren't conscious. I don't know, I would say there's some evidence that can be overridden. I'm not saying that you can reject his view. I just think that to say there's no evidence is a bit wild. I kind of get what they're saying. It's like, yeah, it doesn't seem that way. So we trust that intuition. And his claim is like, if you're going to challenge intuitions, I'll challenge that one, which is the one that it doesn't seem that way, that these physical things are made out of consciousness, so therefore they aren't. I wouldn't say zero evidence, a bit much.
It's
Intuition in
literally
philosophy.
zero. What?
Can you get
What?
rid of intuition in philosophy?
Yeah, you can just sort of, you can just say your intuition, you have your whole thing is based on an intuition too. But actually now you've just triggered me, and I'm going to give you some quotations from some Nobel Prize winners for physics, okay? So first of all, Lorentz, you know, famous guy, he says, I quote, "The mental and the material are two sides of the same thing." Schrödinger, "The material universe and consciousness are made out of the same stuff." De Broglie, he's the guy, it's spelled de Broglie, you know, but he's pronounced de Broglie. Another Nobel Prize winner says, "I regard consciousness and matter as different aspects of one thing." Max Planck, "Consciousness is fundamental and matter derivative from consciousness." Well, okay. And so on. So it's not, you know, it's weirdly, it's the philosophers who've gone truly crazy, in my view, in denying the existence of consciousness. But physicists are not with them on that. I mean, some of them probably are, but they're much more sensible.
You can
And so,
you can cherry pick any group of scientists with quotations. And yes, those early defenders of quantum mechanics, physicists, did in fact think the observer of consciousness might play some important role, but there are people who push back on that. Physicists push back on that now. I mean, I wouldn't say anyone's gone crazy. I don't like that language. But about intuitions, I mean, I guess I kind of see the point that he's trying to make. I mean, I don't like to agree with him. Okay. Yeah, the evidence that the stuff out there isn't conscious is that it doesn't seem to be like the kind of stuff that is known to be conscious. Is that just an intuition? I guess it's just an intuition that stuff couldn't be consciousness. But to say that there's no evidence that suggests that it is, yeah, that's interesting. It's a bit more than I would have thought.
so since you're citing all these people from the past, I mean, is panpsychism, as you understand it, a new view? Did you just come up with this in the 1990s or something, or has it been around for a long time?
Of course not. I mean, I'm not good on the history, but there's a book by David Scribiner called Panpsychism in the West, which basically is just an amazing compilation of quotations for 2,500 years, showing how persistent the idea of panpsychism is. I mean, Russell is on the verge of it, though he's never going to admit it. He's never going to say it outright. But okay, sorry, but listen to Russell. Okay, you ready?
All right,
it's much better if people like Russell talk than if I do. First quotation from his famous 1912 book, The Problems of Philosophy. "Common sense leaves us completely in the dark as to the true intrinsic nature of physical objects. And if there were good reason to regard them as mental, we could not legitimately reject this opinion merely because it strikes us as strange. The truth about physical objects must be strange." Okay, more Russell. 15 years later, 1927, "We know nothing of the intrinsic quality of the physical world, and therefore we do not know whether it is or is not very different from that of percepts. Percepts are mental occurrences." And here's another one I particularly like.
I mean, the problem with all this stuff is like, yeah, it's okay. So even if you grant that, which I'm not 100% sure you should, since I like on-tech structural realism, and part of me thinks, what is all this intrinsic bullshit anyway? But the other part of me is like, we know what the fuck the intrinsic bullshit is, dude. Like, okay. So I mean, it just seems like all that they've got is, well, physics doesn't nail down what the intrinsic properties of these things is. We don't really understand consciousness like ours of the human or animal kind. So maybe there's some version of that, which is at the intrinsic level of physics. I mean, it really is just conjecture. based on a kind of hole that's there. So there's a hole. Physics is weird, so consciousness is strange, so put consciousness in that gap. But what do you get by doing that? So you don't get an explanation. It doesn't advance the discussion in any way. I think like at least mind-brain identity theory does advance the discussion in this way, because you could say, why does pain have the causal effects that it does? How does it get to be the way that it is? You look at the physical state, that's what it is. You tell a story about that. Okay, so that's how pain does what it does and how it becomes what it is. How does that happen according to the panpsychism? Well, there's consciousness, and then somehow there's later consciousness like ours that doesn't really, in my opinion, advance the discussion about how it is that pain has the properties that it does and the causal effects that it does. Now, maybe they're just going to say, yeah, but that's what neuroscience does. But then what's the point of all this panpsychism stuff? It doesn't really seem to help us.
1927. If there is any intellectual difficulty in supposing that the physical world is intrinsically quite unlike that of percepts, this is a reason for supposing that there is not this complete unlikeness. And of course, there is a huge intellectual difficulty in supposing that the physical world is quite unlike that of mental goings on. It's called the hard problem, the problem of consciousness, the one that everybody thinks is the great problem. So, and all that is absolutely dead on.
Yeah, lots of people admit that this is a problem, but not everybody admits that we should take ourselves so seriously that our inability to understand something would lead us to say things like this. Really, I mean, it could be true. I'm not against it. It's just, what reason do we have, really, to take this seriously? We have the hard problem, okay. Then what do we get from positing panpsychism? Like, what benefit do we have? You can't explain consciousness like mine on the basis of that. You can't explain its relation to the brain on the basis of these fundamental particles being conscious. You can't explain how evolution worked in such a way to produce creatures like us with the no emergence stuff. You can't without some kind of emergence, because you have something fundamentally different, these micro consciousnesses, and saying that they're consciousness, I mean, it just doesn't help you. I do like the idea that if physics studies the stuff around us, and if that turns out to have good reason to think it's consciousness, then what is physical is consciousness. So, you know, I'm not against this idea. That's not the way I would use the word physical, but I sort of see the move here and why he's making it. Okay.
We don't know the intrinsic nature of matter. Why should we then suppose something that creates an enormous difficulty for us? The idea that it's in no way already conscious in its basic nature. So, as it were, I would say that,
I mean, it doesn't create an enormous difficulty for us. It doesn't. So the enormous difficulty is an explanatory one. So it creates a difficulty in explaining something. Okay, but that's not an enormous difficulty. It doesn't block us from doing science or from trying to march on and soldier on, so to speak. So why? This is a weird way of framing the problem. Okay.
sense, that is, you know, thoughtful common sense supports panpsychism, because it's not saying there aren't problems with the theory. I'm sure you're going to mention one later, but to say that the initial case, it's the natural view.
No, it's not the natural view, and the initial case from common sense doesn't lead you to panpsychism. Sorry, it doesn't.
Inflammatory is always okay. Yes, you know, I'm just thinking of our illusionist friends and so forth, saying that that panpsychism is the natural view. But yes, I mean, I'm with you there. So.
I'm not an illusionist friend. Why is it that the people think the only options are panpsychism and illusionism? How did this happen? These are the two extreme views. Physicalism, regular physicalism, that consciousness is physical, has not been refuted. It is still on the table. There's no reason to think that there are these extreme options. I mean, why do we gravitate towards one of the extremes? Because people can't understand how a more moderate view would be true. I can only understand this extreme view. It's either all or none. Okay. I don't get it. Yeah, I'm very much. It's embarrassing how seriously people take these intuitions. I mean, it's fine to think of this as an option. It's not fine to say it's the common sense view and that everyone should adopt it, because this rhetoric is just out of control. Wow, man. Okay.
Well, I mean, is this another trigger? Because, the illusionists, the guys who deny the existence of consciousness, Dan Dennett, a man called Francois Camera, a man called, who else is there? There's
Keith Frankish.
Keith Frankish. So I've had Keith on Consciousness Live. Francois I had on Consciousness Live. Dennett won't come on Consciousness Live. But, so let's hear what he's going to say about these men.
Frankie. Yes, and now Jay Garfield is doing it as a Buddhist. Well, I just think that here's how I would.
Yeah, Jay Garfield, really, huh? I've been meaning to think about asking Jay Garfield to come on and talk to me about Buddhism. But he's an illusionist now. I think the Buddhist illusionist means something different than the Coxeye illusionists. I don't know. I tried to talk to Bryce Huebner about this for Unconsciousness Live, because he's a Buddhist, possibly illusionist. Or at least he's someone friendly to the Yogacara kind of Buddhism, and something about illusionism, although whether it's weak or strong illusion, I think it's an open question. It's not clear. So, okay, interesting. Problem is that once I start teaching in March, I'm not going to have time to be doing any of this stuff, except one day a week, and even then I probably won't. So, I don't know. I have like at least 6 people I wanted. But maybe I'll have to wait until the summer or something, once the spring semester starts. So we'll see.
Apply to them. So if you're right, I would say to them, there's no suffering, right? Because there's no conscious experience, so there's no suffering. So that's your view. Well, that's great. I wish.
Yeah, but that's just a caricature of illusionism. This is such tired bullshit, dude. Seriously, it's 2024, man. Okay, so if you are really like the strongest possible illusionist, if you are like the most radical version of illusionism that there is, then you think there is no consciousness, and that no one has ever suffered, and that no one has ever felt love or joy or pain, and that these are all like just false beliefs that people in the history of the universe have had. And this is actually in the Chalmers meta problem paper. This is the argument he gives at the end. He's like, if illusionism is true, then no one has felt pain. Well, someone has felt pain. So yeah, illusionism is false. Now, that argument, while very simple, doesn't capture what the illusionist is trying to do. And this is what this rhetoric, this debate, which I see as largely like a tug of war about, like the rhetoric, the way to talk about consciousness. And therefore it's less interesting to me than other debates, but still an important one. This tug of war, though, is about what the concept of consciousness that we think is the right one. So the people like Strawson think it's phenomenal consciousness, and the illusionists think, no, there's something fishy about phenomenal consciousness, but not about consciousness, not about experience. So experience, according to them, is a real thing. I mean, like, honestly, if illusionism was true, things would be just like this. That's what the illusionists think, as far as I can tell. I mean, it's like the eliminativists of Paul Churchland and those guys, of Patricia Churchland. Patricia Churchland says there's no such things as beliefs when people lose their mind, but it's like things would still be like this. It's just that there would be no state in my head which had the form of believing X. Like you couldn't find it in the neural architecture, some state which corresponded to this like propositional attitude. That's what the eliminativists said. It's not that they don't deny we go around thinking that we believe things and so forth and so on. It's just they literally deny there's something in the psychology of the brain, or the physical workings of the brain. I shouldn't say psychology, the neural workings of the brain, which correspond to that. Okay, great. So that's a debate you could have. Wonderful. So The illusionist is someone who's trying to do the same thing with consciousness, but it's just like, so if illusionism was true, no one ever felt pain. That's absurd. That's not what the illusionist is saying. That's a caricature. That's what you would like for them to be saying so that you could easily dismiss their view. And I will admit that sometimes it sounds like that's what they're saying. And they kind of frame it in that flashy way to draw you in a little bit, but then they start like doing the shuffle towards the more reasonable view. It's a conception of consciousness that's not real. The thing itself is real. So that's the charitable way to interpret it. If you've talked to people, I think Francois is probably the most hardcore. He's the one who's most like, he will actually come out and say, if illusionism is true, then there's a sense of pain that no one's ever felt. Okay. Geez. But then you have to ask him what he means by that, and so forth and so on. So I think this stuff is more complicated than Strawson is letting on. I hate to say it, but Strawson is always like thought with a steamroller, so to speak. He's not very good about fine-grained distinctions, I would say, and about charitably interpreting the other side. But maybe I'm not charitably interpreting him. So maybe I'm the one who's doing that. But I really do feel like, look, it's hard to take illusionism seriously. I thought about it for years and years and years until I finally kind of like framed a way of thinking about it, which they don't agree with when I tell them that. So who knows? But this argument's too quick. No one's ever felt pain, so therefore illusionism is false. It's not good philosophy. Yeah, it's too bad. Strawson's a really nice guy. As I said in a previous video, like I had classes with him, I really like him. But this way of doing philosophy by quotation and ridicule, I just don't like. Like smart people, famous smart people with Nobel Prizes. Nobel Prizes, smart people, dude. They said this. So, fuck you. Oh, okay. Well then, gee, fuck me, dude. I didn't know that. Wow. So anyway, I'm ranting now. This is this is not conducive to getting an appropriate response from their side. This is probably why, I don't know. So I asked Strawson to come on Consciousness Live way back when. He told me flat out, he was like, dude, we don't agree on enough to have a productive discussion. Like, okay. Well, because I was a student in his class, and so we had a lot back and forth. But I felt like I was more trying to figure out where he was coming from. That's what I don't think of myself as trying to like show down people on Consciousness Live. I'm trying to figure out why people smarter than me come to views that aren't mine. That's a serious thing I'm trying to do. But he's not interested in that at the time, at least. But I can see why, because if he said stuff like this to me, it would be hard for me not to say stuff like this back to him. He doesn't want to hear. I think I have some control though. Holy mackerel. Okay. I mean, on the one hand, it's good to have him out there inspiring people because, Philip Goff was his student. And Philip was inspired by this to go on and become the philosopher that he is. So there are people who are clearly inspired by Strawson. Take this kind of rhetoric seriously. Okay, I can't just here ruminate on this. Let's let them finish. The straw man.
No suffering, but I suggest to them that they go and see someone who's being crucified and say, don't worry, mate, there's no suffering, so there's nothing wrong with being crucified. Or maybe
what? Holy, choking on coffee. Go and see someone who's being crucified, dude. I'm gonna cry. Oh my God. I might not ever recover from that. I might not ever seriously recover, dude. What the? Go and see someone being crucified. The most horrendous torture you could imagine. I mean, I can imagine slightly more horrendous things, but it's among. Remember, I played a death metal band. Thick imagination, but dude. So, okay, we're watching someone being crucified and saying, you're not really feeling pain. This is the level of argument we're at. Holy fuck. Okay, I was not prepared for that. I might need to retire from philosophy, dude. I feel bad. I don't mean to be trashing. I like Galen. He's a nice guy. This is. Go and see someone being crucified, dude. Dumb thing to say. Wow.
I suggest to your view, well, that's great. I wish, I wish there were no suffering, but I suggest to them that they maybe go and see someone who's being crucified and say, don't worry, mate, there's no suffering, so there's nothing wrong with being crucified. Or maybe a woman who's, suffering extraordinarily in childbirth and, who may die in the end. Or go to Ukraine and tell all the people there who've lost their fathers or mothers or children that it's an illusion. There's no suffering. I think it's actually a disgusting view. And
yeah,
no, what you're saying actually is disgusting, Galen. Misrepresenting someone's view and saying of them that they're committed to this horrible thing. And this is just a discussion about consciousness, man. This is just supposed to be like science, physics, consciousness. I'm not accusing people of being moral monsters because of their views about how science and oh, dude, wow. This is really. I mean, I sort of knew the level of rhetoric would be high in this video when I clicked on it. I was not prepared for this, but I'm kind of shocked. Okay.
It's hard to see how we could have ethics, how there would be.
No, well, no, ethics is gone. No, there is no harm has ever been done to anyone ever.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's funny, it's comic in a way, because it would mean that there wasn't a problem of evil.
Right.
Yeah, I was thinking about the problem of evil in a way that if God had made the world this way, then there would obviously be no problem of evil. But this is the view that, what about the veil of suffering, and that, there isn't really any suffering because what we think of as suffering isn't, or something like that. In the God's eye view, that was, was Aquinas or Anselm or someone who said that. That's a hardcore view that I wouldn't defend either, but I mean, it is an interesting question to think about the zombie world, if it's possible, a world where there really is no consciousness. So, is the illusionism world a zombie world? Or is the illusionism world a world where there is consciousness? And if even so, would it not be morally wrong to torture a zombie? I mean, I think it would, whether they feel pain or not. Because they have cognitive states and they don't desire, intend, or believe that they ought to be subjected to this. That's enough for me not to do it. But if they really didn't feel pain, like really didn't feel pain, would it be wrong to do? Huh. I mean, my own view is no, I don't think so. But Wow. Okay. This illusionism stuff. Wow. This is getting out of hand. It's getting out of hand. All right. We got to wrap this up because I don't know how much more of this I can take, to be honest.
And they suffer. They get a little bonus on that one, but I think it's just, it shows contempt, utter contempt for the reality of human life and human suffering. And it's shocking to me that people can go, as it were, follow a theoretical idea to that point.
Yeah, and it seems like even if you don't hold a view of ethics on which ethics is fundamentally about reducing suffering and promoting happiness or something, still it seems like everybody has to say that you have to have conscious subjects in order for there to be ethical duties, in order for there to be facts about right, wrong, good, bad, and so forth.
No, everyone doesn't have to say that. I don't think that. I think that consciousness is an important source of morality, but so is reason, so is rationality. If a zombie makes a promise, so if you have a philosophical zombie, and the philosophical zombie has no conscious experience at all, and yet really has a mind and cognitive states, and if the zombie says, I promise to pick you up from the airport, and then decides to do something else instead, then the zombie broke a promise, did something wrong. I think you could say it's immoral, whether it has any consciousness. It didn't stand to its word. That's enough. Like it said it would do something. It's rational in some sense. It understands that it obligates it to do the thing it said. That has nothing to do with consciousness, in my view. It has to do with rationality. And maybe rationality isn't conscious. Yeah, so I would see, I'm a conscious rational agent. But it's like rationality and intelligence limited to only conscious beings? No, zombies, the philosophical zombies, which I suspect are not really conceivable, but put that aside, I can sort of, they seem conceivable, so that's enough to play with them. The philosophical zombies have rational states. They're going to be wanting things, desiring things, believing things, at least not the phenomenal aspect of those, I would say, but the cognitive states. So I don't think everybody needs this. And I will once again mention the work of Jeffrey Lee, who is a great philosopher at Berkeley, a young guy who has his book on alien subjectivity and the idea that there could be states that are like not phenomenally conscious, but in playing the same role in the organism. I think zombies is exactly the kind of creature he has in mind, that even zombies will have states in them that play the same kind of role that phenomenal consciousness does in us, and for them it will matter in a certain way. So I think, so anyway, I'm not saying I agree with any of these things. What I'm saying is that this is too quick. This is not how you do philosophy. You can't simply say you need consciousness. These guys deny it, so they're horrible people. Have followed a theoretical idea to absurdity and only believe it because they're surrounded by like-minded individuals of this craven variety. This is just wow. Okay. I mean, I can see how you can have these views, but I don't endorse the rhetoric. Crucifixion, Ukraine. This is real shit, man. This is stuff this is horrible shit. How can you look at what's going on in the world, seeing real torture, suffering, and then say to these guys, your view has some, it's just like, this is trashy, man. Okay, I'm getting too worked up. I did not expect this.
Yes, that's right. Even independently of whether it's really independent, conscious subject. So you've got to have consciousness.
I'm thinking about Kant, for example. I mean, so Kant's going to say morality is not about, it's not about reducing suffering, but it seems like to be a Kantian, you still have to think that there are conscious agents, or it's
absolutely
you don't actually. I in fact just said you don't. No, you don't. You don't. You have to have rational agents, bro. Rational. That's it. So, in fact, I don't even think you need libertarian freedom. I actually wrote something a long time ago about how you could have compatibilism Kantianism. I think compatibilist Kantianism is a serious view. So I don't think you really need consciousness for Kantianism. You need some kind of rational agent who, conscious or not, is able to reason about themselves as an agent, and therefore comes to the conclusion that if their own actions are free, then so are these other ones. And furthermore, if one ought not to interfere with my free actions, then I ought not to interfere with those free actions, on pain of me, the agent, being irrational, which these things are not one supposing. is. So could you build an irrational agent like that? Perhaps, but it has nothing to do with consciousness. It has to do with rationality. And oh man, okay.
Who is owed respect if there aren't conscious agents?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah, or people or things that can do the right thing.
Yeah, there you go. That's the thing. But Kant, I mean, maybe he did say you respect the humanity in a person. So maybe what he meant was the consciousness. I don't think so. He meant the rational agency of the person, which obviously is bound up with consciousness in some way, but isn't necessarily. Huh. Yeah, I wish there was more pushback from this JP Andrew guy. But of course, Galen won't talk to anyone who wants to give him pushback. That's probably mean. I shouldn't have said that, but
I mean, I suppose you could build a robot that was a very good Kantian.
yeah, exactly.
But I suppose
It
they
would.
would.
It wouldn't have goodwill, it seems, right?
Well, no, but
why wouldn't it have the goodwill? What, dude? Come on. What do you mean by the goodwill? Yes, you could build a very good robot that was a Kantian, and it would have the goodwill because the goodwill is not defined in terms of consciousness.
It would always sort of apply the categorical imperative and work out what the Kantian thing to do was, or it would say, "I cannot lie,"
Does panpsychism have any, since you went there, I mean, does it have anything to say about the potential for AI to be conscious, since people talk about these things these days?
No, up until recently, I've been rather, I mean, I don't think for a moment that any current or foreseeable future machines are conscious. And I mean, I obviously would resist the idea that some people think that you can say that something is conscious as soon as it behaves in a sufficiently complex way. But I certainly wouldn't rule it out a priori. Or
yeah, panpsychism has nothing to say about that. You could be a panpsychist, like Chalmers is friendly to, and think that computers could be conscious because you think that the right functional organization will result in the kind of consciousness we have. You could be a panpsychist more in the Bernardo camp. He's not a panpsychist, he's an idealist, but still, you could be a panpsychist like him and think that consciousness and life go together. You could be a more limited panpsychist and think it's only in human brains. So panpsychism, until you solve the combination problem and explain exactly how these tiny bits get organized into these larger, unified, coherent, subject level like me consciousnesses, you could say whatever the fuck you want. Because there's no constraints on what you can imagine. And at this point, this is all imagination. It's all imagination. Like, what can you imagine as the case? And that could be the case. There's no contradiction in it. So there is no connection between panpsychism and AI consciousness until someone solves the combination problem or the hard problem, not even the combination problem, the hard problem, and explains how it is that certain physical arrangements of matter give rise to consciousness like ours. Panpsychism doesn't help with that. Although apparently it doesn't help with you being like a charitable interpreter of other people's views either.
Just don't know. I mean, one question would be whether the kind of electromechanical complexity you find in a computer or so could somehow be sufficiently of the same kind as the electrochemical complexity you find in our brains is for there to be larger scale consciousness. Yeah, no, it certainly can't be ruled out a priori.
Okay. So it's not the case that the panpsychist must take a particular position in that debate,
No.
as you see it. Okay.
No.
Okay. Good.
There can't
All
be
right.
any reason principle where you couldn't build something that was conscious.
Yeah. Okay. So we've got to touch on the one perennial objection to panpsychism, right? So I'll try to state it, and then we'll see what you say in response.
All right. So I'm gonna try and make it through this, and then we'll be done because this is getting very painful, and it's already quite long. In fact, actually, maybe I'll come back and do this in another session because I need a palate cleanser after that crucifixion debacle, man.